Hello and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live, Season 3, Episode 5. I'm your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th Century Lady. I'd like to begin by thanking last month's guest, Dr. Ismini Pells, who joined me to chat about Philip Skippon, the third most senior general in Parliament's new model army, the British Civil Wars, and her work with the Cromwell Association and the Battlefields Trust. Well, I can't believe we're nearing the end of June already, and it's been a great year for roses, including here at my home in Derbyshire, England. Um, it's been so lovely, and we've been able to have a lovely display, as you can see, those of you who are watching. You could see all the roses have been doing wonderfully, and I know our Stuart ancestors would be very pleased with that as well. On the last weekend in May, I attended the Blueprints of Power exhibition at Blenheim Palace, which is part of the Vanbrugh 300 celebration, honoring the life and achievements of Sir John Vanbrugh. And it was lovely. And you could see many more photos in my blog post about it. Just head on over to www.seventeenthcenturylady.com. Although we usually focus our attention exclusively on the history of 17th century Stuart Britain, this episode will be more about the French connection to Stuart Britain and the histories of the 18th century Stuart exiles. And so I've tried to do my hairstyle today in a suitably late 1690s style. And you could see the source of my inspiration on today's Stuart Saturday posts. Our guest today is Dr. Jérémy Filet, who is lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University and a fellow of the Royal Historical Society. He has been teaching in higher education for 10 years in France and in the UK. His research on educational travel and Jacobitism has been published in a variety of publications, and his first monograph, The Jacobites and the Grand Tour, Educational Travel and Small States Diplomacy, was awarded the research prize of the Université de Lorraine. He has also published numerous academic reviews for the Journal of 18th Century Studies, the Court Historian, and Northern History. Joining us live from Manchester, England, please welcome Dr. Jérémy Filet. Hello.
Andrea, how are you?
Hi. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get in and set the scene, shall we? There were many links between France and Stuart Britain. Now, in your book, you state that since the regency of Marie de Guise in Scotland, the Stuarts and the Lorraines were dynastically linked, and this ensured that the reputation of the princes of the House of Lorraine as defenders of the Catholic Church became known in Britain and Ireland. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, of course. So to explain that very long relationship between, the Lorraine and the Stuart family, you do have to go back a little bit to the 15th century. But even before that, just for those who may not know where Lorraine is, I could show you maybe on the map that it was this very tiny duchy that was between the Holy Roman Empire and France, and I think you can probably see it somewhere here.
Yes.
So it's not a good position to be um, at at that time. And if you zoom in a little bit on that map, you'll be able to see what the Duchy of Lorraine looked like in the 18th century. And again, I think it's very important to show you that it
Mm.
was right between France and right between the Holy Roman Empire. Because
Wow.
for those who know the
Yes.
history, it's not a great place to be
No.
geographically.
No.
So
Wow.
I promised we were going back to the 15th century to
Hmm.
understand a little bit where it all starts. It starts with actually some cousins of the Lorraine family called the Guise, who
Mhm.
I think they're quite famous in history, and
Yeah.
there were a Catholic branch of the House of Lorraine. And
Right.
I mean, you know what happened? The Reformation ideas ended up triggering the war of religion in France. You have Henry VIII break with Rome, means that Protestant ideas also spread in Britain. And so what happened is that the Lorraine family, like you said, was known as defenders of of Catholicism, and their Guise cousin benefited from that reputation. So what happened in the context the of that context is that the French king decided to send married Guise, so cousin of the Lorraine, to marry James V of
Mm.
Scotland.
Right.
And why was she chosen? It's because she was already related to him, basically,
Ah. Uh-huh.
via a grandmother, Philippa de Gueldre, who was also a cousin of James III of Scotland. So, the
Oh.
usual slightly incestuous marriage there. And so
Right.
when she arrives in Scotland, she carries that sort of reputation with her. So at the start of really the Stuart period, the first thing is that James I of England and Sixth of Scotland, he has Lauren blood, so that would be the first link, and
Right.
continues throughout the centuries all the way to the 18th century. So 16th, 17th century, you have exchanges of envoys between families. Not any sort of envoys. Mary Stuart, who was the daughter by fact of a Lauren princess,
Mhm.
ends up being involved in Lorraine, and the people connected the Duke and the Stuart kept moving back and forth. Um, and those envoys kind of deepened the relationship.
I
But
see.
I really think the most important part of that relationship happens a little bit later, in the 17th century, so during the 30 Years' War and during the
Mm.
Fronde in France, because Duke of Lorraine, Charles IV, one of the dukes, he was quite naughty. He was a bit of a crazy character. He tried to have more than one wife. He had a standing army that was more sort of a mercenary wandering force, if you want. And he ends up making a really unwanted enemy, Cardinal Richelieu. And have you seen on the map, Lorraine is right next to France. So,
Right.
it's not
Yes.
a really good idea when you're in charge of such a small area,
Mm.
sandwiched between these two big powers. And so he ended up
Indeed. Yeah.
in exile. What happens when you're in exile? You ask your friends for help.
Mhm.
And believe it or not, the first person who wanted to help was Charles I of England. So, another
Oh.
another Stuart.
Yeah. There we
Um,
go.
yeah. So first link here, another one, and I mean, you're well placed to know this, but 3 years later, Wars of the Three Kingdoms starts. So Charles I is in no position to help Lorraine anymore, but the Lorraine family return the favor. So when Queen Arantxa Maria and the future Charles II go into exile, they think we could ask the Duke of Lorraine for help again.
Right.
Okay, so they did,
Yeah.
um, and it was willing to help, but after 1649, I think Charles I was in no position to command any army whatsoever, so that
Ooh.
that kind of the plan fell through.
Oh boy.
Um, but what happened there after that is that Charles I was in Ireland for a while, for the war, and the Irish government of the time heard that they could have had some help from the Duke of Lorraine. So
Mhm.
what they did after that is that they thought we are going to invite the Duke of Lorraine to be protector of Ireland. just to get some military help, and also because there is a Catholic connection. So you can imagine that the English parliamentarians did everything to prevent help from reaching Ireland, and
Right.
that's why it never happened. Well, again, just the fact that the Irish Catholics thought, we know that the Lorraine had a connection with the Stuarts and
Mm.
that reputation, we are going to invite them to help us. So you end up with that three-way relationship at that point already, Stuart, Lorraine, and somewhere in their island, and it keeps
Right.
going over to the next Stuart that you know very well,
Yeah.
Charles II, and he was in exile in Brussels
Hmm.
with the future James II. So they were there together. And
Yes.
remember, Charles IV is very naughty. So Richelieu, being much more powerful than him,
Hmm.
managed to oust him out of Lorraine. So they both end up in exile at at the same time and in the same place as well
Wow.
in Brussels. And so before the Restoration, in 1660, the Stuarts really tried to get money and military support from Charles IV of Lorraine, and they learned from what the Irish had done before. They thought, there is a connection with Ireland, so we're going to
Hmm.
find an Irish middleman to negotiate, which was very clever. And this guy is called Theobald Taft, and I think we might talk a little
Yes.
bit more about him um, later. But
Yeah.
it went so far in those negotiations that the the Duke of Lorraine had already made plans to invade Ireland on behalf of the Stuarts to help them out. I mean, we know it never happened, but the fact that you have a plan is quite telling.
Yeah.
Um,
That's quite something.
yeah, so Irish Catholics, Lorraine and Stuarts connecting together,
Hmm.
um, all the way through the century, all the way until 1688.
Wow. Incredible. And these are things that people don't often think about when sometimes we fall into that sort of trap of only thinking about Stuart Britain and not seeing the connections to other courts on the continent. And so that's what I found really interesting about your book, that I was, reading it, I was able to see this other angle. And I loved that. And it's always so refreshing to see that sort of a different perspective. Um, so yes, you've gone through um, the various links between Stuart Britain and the various courts. Um, so we have this family tree here, and I apologize if it's a little hard to see, but you could get anyway. You could get a good visual of the house and this the structure there. Um, so there's a lot of political turmoil that ended up happening over the course of the next few decades. So I'll go towards the summer of 1688 now. James II's queen, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son, James Francis Edward Stuart, thereby ensuring a Catholic succession. So this led to a situation in which Protestants had grave concerns about the future of the nation, and ultimately the king's nephew slash son-in-law, William of Orange, invaded in what is often referred to as the Glorious Revolution, something that confuses many people. Very similar terms, such as Jacobites, Jacobins, and Jesuits. And I did write an article about that on my website because it's so often confused. So, leaving the latter two aside for the purposes of today's chat, would you please tell us who the Jacobites were?
Of course. So first, I like the fact that you said glorious revolution,
Yes.
air quotes, because maybe some people listening know that we don't call it that anymore. We call it the 1688 revolution for many, many,
Hmm.
many reasons.
Yes.
If people want a good book about that, is Stephen Pincus, um, who has a good book about that.
Yes.
Usually, people know a few things about the Jacobites, especially recently with the TV show Outlander. I don't know if you
Yes.
watched it. And maybe the Skyboat song,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
tells us about the escape of Bonnie Prince Charlie from the Isle of Skye. But the Jacobites started much earlier, and they started, yes, in 1688, if you'd like, officially. And
Hmm.
you can see already Jacobite, James, that there's potentially a link between the two. It's because their name derived from the Latin from James, which is Jacobus.
Hmm.
And basically, what they do is that they just oppose all the outcomes of the 1688 revolution. They believe that it's only God who chooses their rightful king. And so the rightful king are the Stuarts. Okay,
Right.
it's not William of Orange. It's not anyone else. And so from the 17th all the way through the 18th century, they just remained discontent with the Williamite and then the Hanoverian regime. And instead, they support the exiled Stuart claims to the throne.
Mm.
You may start to understand now while I keep talking about exile and I talk about exile so much earlier, it's because I think it's an important part of this story. And I
Yes.
think this image is James Francis Edward Stuart, who is the son of James II and Seventh and Mary of Modena. And
Hmm.
his supporter call him James III and Eighth because they think he's the rightful king. And
Hmm.
I chose this picture in particular because it is not the traditional picture you see of him, which is
No.
a painting by Alexis Simon Bell, but that's an etching, so a sort of engraving that is found in Lorraine, which is one of the spoil states I talk about in the book. So here is
Yes.
the main character of today.
Well, it's a
Funny,
really
one of the
great
main
etching
characters.
too. So thanks. Yeah. Um, so it is it's fascinating. And yes, you're absolutely right. More people now associate Jacobites with the Outlander. And so pop culture has helped make this more accessible to people, and people are aware of these. Whereas when I first started all of this back in 2008, some time ago, there was very little exposure for the general population to these terms. And so, yes, that's great. Um, and uh, and so more people will know where this comes from. Um, so going back to the region of Lorraine and the family associated with it, of course, they were of great importance. And again, that's something I don't think many people realize, even if they are, uh, you know, well acquainted with the history of the period. Um, so you mentioned in the book that whereas the Stuarts were predominantly Protestants, the Lorraine family was seen as the champion of Catholicism in Europe. So we briefly touched on this earlier, but would you please tell us more about some of the key figures in this family?
Yes, yes, of course. I think you touched on a little issue there. It's how does that work? If the Stuarts are Protestants and the Lorraine of Catholics,
Mm.
before James II revealed his secret conversion, I think it was in 1676, if I'm not mistaken. There were issues, but both dynasties were in exile, so I think um, they really preferred to work together and talk about the religious issue. And of course, after that point, their Catholicism kind of aligns, so it's not so much of a problem anymore.
Hmm.
Um,
I see.
so in terms of the important people of the Lorraine family, we talk about Charles IV, who was a little bit of the naughty Duke, but here I think that's a picture of Duke Leopold, who
Hmm.
is the Duke that is restored in 1697 by the Treaty of Ryswick, um, and he will have a lot of of connections with the Stuart family, and notably with James the third and eighth. And the other person that I would like to talk about from the family is Charles Henri de Vaudémont, who is a cousin of the Duke, and one of his ancestors, one of Vaudémont's ancestors, was sent to England at some point by a previous Duke to convince James I to be more tolerant towards Catholicism. So another link here, and his descendants, that's him, Charles Henri, is Prince of Commercy. That's also a nice town in Lorraine. He will also ends up being involved with the Jacobites in the 18th century. What's interesting about him is that he had previously met James II and VII at Versailles, because he was one of the most famous princes of Louis the XIV's court in the 17th century. So these two are not nobodies. And what happens is that later down the line, after the Treaty of Utrecht, the Stuarts end up bringing Lorraine, and these two people starts interacting more and more with James III and VIII.
Right.
So these are the two main Lorraine people that we need to talk about today, I think.
Right. Well, great. It's great to see the portraits as well. So in chapter 2, you showed how Irish Jacobites ended up settling in Lorraine following the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697. Would you please tell us what was the Treaty of Ryswick about?
So the Treaty of Ryswick ends what we call the War of the League of Augsburg. Oh, you just see it right here, the Treaty of Ryswick. And that started in 1688 and in 1697. So the war was basically caused by Louis XIV's greediness. He just led a sort of expansion policy in Europe, and the other European powers decided to stop him. And I also think personally that he vexed William of Orange by recognizing James III and VIII as the king.
Right.
He was also James II and VII, got my numbers tangled. And he was also welcoming him in his duchy. So, naturally the war started, and in 1697 the treaty was signed, and as usual you impose conditions of people when you do peace. And two conditions that are important for our story today. The first one is that France needed to give the Duchy of Lorraine back to Leopold. So, I've been talking about exile quite a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Leopold had been in exile in the Holy Roman Empire, so next door to Lorraine, right. Again. And so one of the conditions was he was restored. So Leopold goes back to Lorraine. And another condition was that Louis XIV had to disband a fair part of James II and VII's Jacobite army, who had followed him into exile in France. So what happens after the Treaty of Ryswick is that Leopold goes back to his duchy, which had lost quite a fair amount of its population, and he wants to restore its territory to their full glory, if you like. Right. By modern standards, his idea to achieve this goal would be quite crazy to some, because what he does to restore his territory to their glory, he just welcomed all sorts of immigrants. So people of various talents, people to employ as administrators, people to employ in the military, people to be present at courts, to repopulate and to dynamize his duchy, if you like. And as it happened, these Irish Jacobites were just disbanded from France next door. So they knew of the reputation of the Lorraine family. So you suddenly have a movement of Irish Jacobites from France to Lorraine.
Wow, that's very interesting. And again, that's something that is not often discussed. So very interesting indeed. Thank you. So you mentioned earlier the Tape family were well-established Jacobites. Let's spend a few minutes talking about them and their connections with both Stuart and Lorraine, please.
Yeah. So remember when we talked about the person negotiating between the Stuarts and the Lorraine? So it's
Yes.
the very first staff, Theobald staff,
Mm.
um, uh, Taft Tafe. You know, I'm French. Sometimes the
I'm not
pronunciation
sure.
of these Irish names are difficult for me, but I think it's tough. Let's go with tough.
Right. Okay, we will.
Um, so, you know, he's the first point of contact, but his descendants will end up in the service of the Duke of Lorraine, and they would somehow align with Jacobite ideologies um, along the way. So, how do you know that? Well, first point, you know, Theobald, when Charles II is restored, he gets his land back, which was confiscated before, and he also gets a title. He becomes the first Earl of Carlingford,
Mhm.
and he's so close to Charles II that we even have a letter in which Charles II says that he's a good friend of 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 Taft. So that's the first point. And if you
Right.
go a little bit down the family tree and you look at Nicholas Taft,
Mhm.
who is one of his sons, he died at the Battle of the Boyne in
Ah,
1690. So here, you know, it's a clear Irish Stuart connection.
yes, very much so. Yeah.
Nicholas' brother, so next to him, Francis, he ends up in the service of Charles V of Lorraine. So that's the Duke between Charles IV and Leopold. So he's Leopold's dad, and
Right.
so he serves in the army under Charles V, but he keeps having connections with the Stuarts because when James II wants to send his illegitimate son, the Duke of Berwick, to do some military feats in Europe, he ended up under the tutelage of Taft.
Ah,
And what's important with Taft is that he was so close to Charles V that when he died, Taft became the tutor of the future Duke Leopold of Lorraine while
wow,
he
that's
was in
something.
exile. So
Yeah.
basically, when Leopold come back to Lorraine, he think I'm going to reward this person, and
Hmm.
he ends up appointing him as a sort of what you would call today a prime minister. You
Mhm.
know, he had the biggest salary of all of Leopold's administration, um,
Oh.
and you know he was a Catholic Irishman
Mhm.
arriving in 1688 in Lorraine. So he made sure that his fellow Irish Catholics, who had just been disbanded from the Jacobin army in France,
Mhm.
were welcomed in Lorraine. So I mean, I will pass you all the financial aids he provided and the laws he supported to make sure that the Irish Jacobites would have a good life in Lorraine. But you know, they're in the book for those interested.
Yeah.
But he really, really, really used his influence and he really, really helped. And if you think that stopped there, there are two other Taft on that family tree. And when that Taft in Lorraine died, he left all his possession to his first cousin, who was still in
Mhm.
Ireland. And his other cousin, so the sixth in so the next one, ended up going back to Lorraine to become Duke Leopold's chancellor. So you know,
Wow.
again,
Yes,
connection between the Stuart, the Lorraine, and not just any Irish Catholics, but the Taft in particular.
indeed. Wow, it's quite intricate, all of these um, connections. Very fascinating. Um, a large part of your book, of course, is about the Grand Tour. So, what was the Grand Tour like in the late 17th century and early 18th centuries? Um, how did that differ from the 19th century version of the Grand Tour, with which perhaps many of us are more familiar?
Yeah, so yeah, the 18th century Grand Tour, the 19th century Grand Tour. I mean, obviously they have connections, but
Mhm.
they were quite different.
Mm.
Especially. early 18th century because it was a quite exclusive rite de passage. It was always quite
Mm.
expansive. It was mostly for the aristocracy, the gentry, and it was designed as a long educational journey. Typically month, even about a year, and
Mm.
it was much less considered as the leisurely kind of trip abroad.
Mm.
Whether the 19th century country was safer, cheaper,
Yes.
there was more accessible modes of transportation as
Mm.
well.
Yeah.
Whether the 18th century one was more dangerous, especially in the first half of the 18th century.
Mm.
So that means that you choose your destination with great care,
Yes.
and you would often have families helping you to plan your tour, and you would not go alone as well. You would usually have a tutor that would be selected by your family.
Oh.
um, in terms of destination as well, I mean, Italy was one of the most popular destinations that's very well known,
Mm.
but also, France and the Low Countries. I still call this the Low Countries sometimes, uh, but I think today would be Belgium, the Netherlands,
Right.
and if again, if you think about where Lorraine is, if you want to travel to Italy via England and let's say a return via the Netherlands, for instance, Lorraine is bang on in the middle of all these itineraries. And Leopold, I think he knew that educational travel was kind of important at the time, and so as he's restored to his duchy, he also creates an academy specifically designed for foreigners who were on the Grand Tour. Because remember what I did before, first thing he does, returning to his duchy, is invite foreigners to repopulate.
Hmm.
So when he creates an academy, he designs it so that foreigners would attend.
I see. And that's very interesting. You also stated that the Academy of Luneville, please excuse me if I mispronounce that, um, provided opportunities to study French, German, and Italian. From the 1650s, French was the language spoken by the European elites. And this wasn't always the case, was it? I mean, Latin was once the main language, was it not? When roughly did French become the more desirable language to learn?
Well, first, good pronunciation on Luneville.
Okay, thank you.
And I think so. French, I think, slowly overtook Latin as the language of the elite. I think during the 17th century,
Mm.
but it became the language used for diplomatic correspondence and for treatises a little bit later. I think the last international treaty written in Latin was the Peace of Westphalia, so that would be
Mm.
1648.
Yes.
But all the ensuing treaties, I mean, the Peace of Rizek that we just mentioned, would
Mm.
be written in French.
Wow.
Probably until the 20th century. I think ironically, it's the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 that really made English the new language of diplomacy. So before that, Latin, and now French. And so
Yes.
that means that during the 1650s, due to, I mean, the Sun King's growing cultural hegemony, um,
Mm.
the you know the, the French language kind of grew, and because of the Grand Tour, because you had to go to Italy, it means that you also had to learn good Italian. So
Yes.
travelers, they would also learn German or Dutch. But I'm not the first academic to say that. You see Rosemary Sweet or John Gallagher, they've worked on that very well. But again, if you think about Rennes and where it's placed, it's right between the Holy Roman Empire and France. So if you want to
Yeah.
learn German and French, you're very well situated, and you're also on the
Yeah.
routes towards Italy via Switzerland. So you can stop
Yeah.
at Luneville on the way, and it was a pretty nice place to stop, as you could see on this picture. It's still quite nice today
Yes.
if you want if
It's
you want to
beautiful.
visit, and you may realize that looks a lot like Versailles.
It does. Yes.
Yes. And so the academy was there. It was nice. It was on the way, and you could learn French, French and German as well. So
I see.
see the language changes, and Leopold is a little bit in the right place at the right time with the right IDs.
Right. Wow. Fabulous. Um, according to uh, Richard Ansell, the most important skills for British travelers to bring home were the French language and a mastery of bodily exercises and courtly knowledge. All right, so we understand about the French, but what kind of bodily exercises and courtly knowledge were students expected to learn?
Oh, there were quite a few. On Richard Ansell first, if you want, his really good book is The Perfect Gentleman, and I've used it quite proficiously to write mine. So the bodily exercises could mean quite a lot of things, but for the Academy of of Lorraine, it meant a lot of military exercises and a lot of horse exercises. So
Mm.
you would have riding classes. You would also have ikiachi classes, so how to tend to horses. And I
Mm.
mean, we know how horses were a symbol of status at the time, so you could
Yes.
expect that to be a part of it. But you also had vaulting classes, equestrian military history, and the military arts were also part of these bodily exercises. So, for
I
instance,
see.
in Nineveh, you had musket shooting classes, pike techniques, flag maneuvering. So anything you would need, and believe it or not, fortification building exercise. So people who go around and build fake fortifications to learn how to do it.
Wow,
Um,
that's very interesting. Yeah,
it must be
I
very
didn't know
very odd,
that.
entering the academy, seeing people making their own little fake fortress, just like children. But
Yeah,
this is what it was, and he
these
also had
playground
fencing
skills
and
coming to
fencing.
into use. Sorry.
Exactly. And next to it, you would have people training their fencing skills, and upstairs in the chateau, dancing. So that was all to differentiate the gentry from the common folks, if you'd like.
Hmm.
And I
I
guess the
see.
courtly knowledge is what was often referred to as politeness. Knowledge of the course. And
Mm.
again, I think Leopoldi was quite savvy there, because his academy was next to his ducal court.
Hmm.
It was in the same building, so you could gain
Right.
knowledge at the academy and then attend the court at the same time. So two bird, one
Very
stone
handy.
situation.
I see.
And
Yes.
he was particularly good at welcoming people. This Leopold, he made sure they acquired what you would call to be networking skills.
Mm.
And if you look at letters or travel narratives, people who spend time in Lorraine, they often report that they're invited to balls, plays, parties. They get to dine, even with the Duke sometimes, to meet those people of quality that were so
Mm.
important to meet. And
I
I think
see.
Leopold enjoyed it. He invited people to hunt to hunt with him. So really the functioning of the academy worked in his favor. And he really wanted it, because if you look at how the academy was publicized in Europe, the tracts, um, it was clearly stated that you would do those bodily exercises,
Hmm.
math, language, and you would do court customs and politeness. So again, quite savvy Leopold, right place, right time, with the right ID to
I
attract people.
see. Yes. It does remind me of something. I say this a lot, but I live very close to Bolsover Castle, and of course there was the Cavendish family and their work with equestrian and um, things, and they had the riding school, and so that
Mm-hmm.
was another school that people would learn how to take care of uh, horses and that. So it's a similar situation, I think.
And he was not
This
the only one, but by far there were others in Europe, definitely
mm,
in France
yes,
especially.
it was definitely a thing to do, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, So Louis XIV of France ruffled some feathers, didn't he, when he acknowledged James II and seventh son as James III of England and Ireland and the eighth of Scotland in 1701 during William III's reign. Um, the death of Spanish King Carlos II in 1700 led to the War of the Spanish Succession under the reign of Queen Anne, who ruled from 1702 to 1714. How did this war and Anne's reign affect Jacobites in Britain and on the continent?
In quite a few ways, but I think you do need to understand first where that war comes from, and
Mm,
what happens with the Treaty of Utrecht to really kind of get it. You'd think Louis
sure.
the XIV would have understood that crossing William of Orange and wanting too much of Europe for himself was not going to fly after Ryswick. But long
Mm,
story short,
yeah.
no. Um, so the war happened, and in 1713, the war was brought to an end by the Treaty of Utrecht.
Mm,
But the two people who were again in the middle of the trade-off, just for Ryswick, were the Lorraine family and the Jacobites, because Leopold was again in a situation where France was using this duchy as an highway for an army, if you'd
mm,
like. But prior to the treaty, there's a lot of negotiation details that I'm going to pass here. But what happened is that Leopold was led to believe that England, well, Queen Anne, which is right there, um, would support territorial pretensions he had over what's today Luxembourg.
mm,
And at the same time, Anne's government really wanted James III and VIII, the Jacobite court, out of France, just to have them, further from the Channel, and for them to lose one of their allies, which was Louis XIV.
right.
So France basically asked Leopold whether he would welcome the Jacobite court in Lorraine, and Leopold was not quite sure. So what
Mm,
do you do when you're not sure about the political state of a country? You send an envoy to gather information about the state of support for the Stuarts in Britain. And his envoy was not really good, to be completely honest, and he was easily convinced that there was quite a fair amount of support for Jacobites in Britain. That's because he had
mm,
very biased sources around Queen Anne's court. And so
oh,
what's important is that by the time they signed the Treaty of Utrecht, um, Leopold um, really thought that he would eventually cash in on England and France support by welcoming the Jacobites in Lorraine. And on top of
mm,
that, Leopold believed that the Jacobites having that support in Britain. So if there was a restoration opportunity presenting itself for the Jacobites, Leopold would end up in the good grace of the next ruler of the British Isles. And
mm,
again, just like with the Academy, savvy Leopold, what happened is that James and a reduced Jacobite court, they settled in Lorraine after Utrecht in 1713 under an incognito, Chevalier de Saint Georges. And they were welcomed by all these people we've talked about, those
yeah.
Irish Jacobites, those who had settled around the Taft family,
Mm,
all the high-ranking officials of the Duke, princes that were close to the Duke, like Vaudemont, and James and his courtiers. They would often attend the events at Leopold's court, at the Academy, and so the Duke of Lorraine made sure that James met the people of power that could help the Jacobite courts.
right.
So really the effect of the war on the Jacobites in Britain and on the continent is that the Jacobite court lost its access to what's of its most powerful ally,
Mm,
France, and the
right.
Jacobite court moved to Lorraine and therefore gained another ally. And as you know, I mean, if you have the family tree with Queen Anne and James III, I can show you this how
Yes.
awkward that relationship must have been, because they
Yeah,
were
we can
you know they
get
were
that.
half brothers and sisters.
Yes. If we can, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
yes,
can still the other
very
Stuarts.
clearly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so William of Orange was married to Mary Stuart, but they were also somehow related. It's those usual strange
Mm,
family tree of the period. But
yes, they were first
Anne and
cousins.
James as
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
cousin James as well, were there. So
Yes.
it must have been an awkward family dinner. Uh,
Yeah.
you stole my throne, you stole my throne.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, here is
Yes,
here
indeed.
is the outcome of all of that. That the Jacobite lost an ally, gained a new one, and they had to move, yeah, to move home.
Wow. Yes. Very complicated. Oh, yeah. Ah, families. Royal families in particular. Um, uh, so in chapter 6, you stated that James the Third, or also known as the Old Pretender, envisaged a military action in the British Isles from February 1714. Um, so the thing is, Queen Anne died in 1714, and this heralded hope for some Jacobites, despite the Act of Succession from 1701, I believe,
Yeah.
which stated that the throne would pass to the next Protestant member of the family, which meant bypassing James's son and going over to the German House of Hanover, because
Mhm.
that line descended from James the Sixth of Scotland, first of England. And so you did show us the family tree, and that was made it very clear. Um, but after 1714, um, things eventually were moving around at such a pace that it led to a small Jacobite force to a defeat at the Battle of Preston the following year. Please, would you tell us about the 1715 Rising? I mean, what were the
Yeah.
repercussions of this, please?
So there are a lot of things. That picture that you saw here is actually James landing a little bit late at the very end of the 1715 rising at Peterhead. So the first thing that you need to
Oh,
know about this rising is that it failed.
mm,
And people often call it the 15. And it's one of the numerous military actions that the Stuart took to the Jacobites took to put the Stuart back on the throne of the Three Kingdoms. So
mm-hmm,
you had one in 08, 1717,
mm,
1723,
yeah,
1745. So they keep trying.
yeah,
What's special
as
about
they
the
should.
15 is that it had a really good chance of success. So, like you said,
Mm,
when Queen Anne died, and the act of succession was used to pass the throne to George of Hanover, quite a fair
mm-hmm,
amount of population was crossed by this. There
mm,
were riots on the day of George the First
yeah,
accession, and in January of that year, the Whig won the election over the Tories, and so that means that
mm,
brought further political unrest, and you had quite a lot of high-ranking politicians who defected to the Jacobites. So first you
right,
have political unrest and unrest among the population. Then you have the force that the Jacobites managed to gather, which was around 20,000 soldiers on on the soil on the British Isles, and they got financial support from the papacy, and of course, from the Duke of Lorraine. So money, um, unrest in all sorts, and soldiers. And we should not
mm,
forget Scotland. Quite a few people were still against the union of the crowns of England
yes,
and Scotland.
yep,
So it means what, that we have a really favorable situation for Rising to succeed. So you think, why did it fail? Well, several reasons. First, I think the people in charge of the Rising, the most famous being the Earl of Mar, they took a
mm,
series of questionable decisions strategy
mm,
wise. And like you see on this picture, James also arrived too late. And because Louis XIV had died in September, James could not really secure help from France. So,
mm,
you know, the rising ended up failing, and James traveled back to Lorraine.
I
The
see.
repercussions of this rising is that, um, well, first Leopold noticed that James would not be restored anytime soon, And both England and France pressured Leopold to ask James to leave because the new French region was not a friend of the Jacobites. So
Mm.
in 1716, James moved further away from the Channel and he settled in the Papal States. So you see those repercussions are just people
Yes.
people moving, our lives changing. And I think I'm going to throw a bit of shameless self promotion here, but if you want to know more about the repercussion of the rising, the culture, the legacy, I'm one of the
Mm.
editors of an edited collection about that very topic with two of my
Oh,
colleagues, Callum Cunningham and William Monaca, and it should
uh-huh.
come out probably next year with WP. So you asked the
Wow.
question about the repercussions, but I think you'll
Yes.
discover more very, very soon. You know, I'm a bit biased
Wow.
saying the book is good, but
Well, that's great. Thank you for letting us know. Yes.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on the show then in the future. um, thank you. Um, so the political situation now having been discussed, how did all of this situation, how did this affect the Grand Tour?
So the Grand Tour in general, must have been affected by any political situation. When you
Mm,
travel, if there's a war, you go around it. If the friends you contacted to travel places
yeah.
are in a favorable situation, they will help you. If they're not, they won't. And also according to who was allied with your own allies, the people you would align with. So here, with Britain, you would travel to different places. But I can tell you exactly how it affected the Grand Tour for people passing through Lorraine. I'm going to
Mm,
pass on the slight nightmare that it was to cross-reference all the sources to manage to find out the travelers going um, passing through Luneville from the British eyes, because it's a very, very long story. But
yeah, I'll bet. Yes.
before before
Must have been.
before I did my work, um,
Mhm,
there were 14 travelers. Well, it, people had identified 14 travelers from the British side passing to Luneville,
mhm.
and I ended up with about 85 names. So
Oh,
a tad more, a tad
oh
more.
dear.
So I thought there must be something there happening. You know,
Hmm.
so many people go, and we've missed so many. We've missed so many because of the sources, but I think we also missed them because of how the political situation we've discussed affect their travel. So I looked into the political affiliations or the political sympathies of those who attended the Academy of Lorraine, and what I ended up with was something quite surprising that I just didn't expect it. Is that from 1688 to the 1720s, most of the British and Irish attendees at the Academy of Luneville were somehow expressing some degrees of Jacobite sympathies. And they
Ah.
attended the academy either because they were connected to, some people already live there, so those Jacobites, so either via family who had settled there around Taft, or
Mhm.
via tutors, who had been trained in Lorraine, or even because the Jacobite court in exile was there from 1713 to 716. So that
Right.
was the first chart. But when I looked at those coming from the 1720s onward, so after the failure of the 15, after Leopold asked James to leave, most of these people were more in line with the Georgian government. So
Mm.
what does that tell you? That tells you that Leopold, being a clear support of the Jacobites up until 1716, attracted a certain types of individual to his
Right.
academy. But when he officially said, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with the Jacobites um, anymore, travelers who didn't want to, who feared being associated with Jacobitism before, thought that they could suddenly attend the academy. So you have the political situation of the Jacobites that had an impact on the Grand Tour, at least for that region. And hopefully maybe elsewhere. Maybe that's the next book.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. And you do have a really interesting pie chart. There are lots of charts and images in your book, but on
Yeah.
page 122, you have one showing the breakdown of travelers to Lorraine by national group, with a whopping 71% of them being English. Would you please tell us more about this? I know you already uh, discussed some of it already, but
Yeah.
you also stated that the travel text, of course, seemed to be free from Jacobitism, and that's very interesting. And you've touched on that, but perhaps some more, please.
Yeah, so first I'd say on the pie charts, why do you have so many English travelers? Well, that's because of Henry VIII, actually. So I told you earlier that Mary Stuart engaged with the University of Pont-à-Mousson,
Hmm.
which is a place in Lorraine. And when Henry VIII dissolved the English monasteries, you had exiled Benedictine monks who settled in Dieulouard, which is a town in Lorraine. And in that town, they would train train members of Catholic families because in England you could not have a Catholic education. So Catholic families who'd send their children to be educated in various
Hmm.
places, and that included Gillois. And a lot of the people who were educated there ended up becoming traveling tutors on the Grand Tour. And so
Hmm.
the tutor knew of Lorraine, they had contact there. So they brought back their protege to Lorraine while on the tour with them. Um, and it was also common for exiled Catholic community at the time to use family or contact network in order to travel abroad. And they had contacts around Leopold's court that could facilitate the travel there. And we talked about the cost of travel. Travel was quite
Hmm.
expensive. So it means that
Right.
people would travel in groups, and the tutor would do more and more than one travel. So over time, you end up with quite a lot of English Catholics visiting Lorraine, okay, just
Right.
just by
Okay.
accumulation.
Yes.
And after the 1720s, words of mouth had kind of reached Britain that the Academy of Lorraine was very good. So people in England took notice of it, and they recommended the academy to each other. And you even have members of the same family coming one after
Hmm.
another, recommending it to colleagues and friends. So both those factors kind of make it that you have more English travelers in Rennes in comparison to Scottish, Irish, or Welsh travelers.
Right. Very, very interesting. Um, I do want to say that I found your book very fascinating,
Thank you.
and for those of you listening, I would definitely recommend you pick up a copy. Um, it I certainly learned a lot by reading it. So right now we're going to move along to some more personal questions, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, and I'd like to know, do you remember what first got you interested in history?
Um, yes. Weirdly enough, not history. It
Oh,
was Milton. It was Paradise Lost. I was
wow.
second year university with lecturer called Nathalie Collet,
Hmm.
and she just gave us a course about Paradise Lost, about Milton, and I really enjoyed it. And we moved into the context, and we saw that picture of Charles I, being
Hmm.
martyr with the crown and
Yes.
the Ancon Basilica, and I think that
Hmm.
that's where it started for me, really.
Right.
So I started with
How
literature
fascinating.
rather than history.
Yes. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, for me, I went in via Shakespeare. So Shakespeare got me
Oh,
into the theater, and then I thought, oh, let's see what else is in this period, and I ended up loving it. So we all have different
you
ways
should,
into it, do we?
if you like Shakespeare in the theater, you should go see a show called Something Rotten that has just
Uh-huh.
premiered in Manchester
Oh,
this
yeah.
week, and it's maybe a slightly silly take on Shakespeare, but you might enjoy that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Um, and and so you were learning about Milton, And then when did you know you wanted to be a historian?
Probably 1 or 2 years after that, because my university was in Lorraine, in Nancy, and that's
Wow.
very close to Lunéville. And there
Wow.
was there was a series of conferences in the Lunéville Castle, and
Hmm.
I thought, oh, I should have a listen. And
Yes.
I don't remember who the historian talking was, but I saw it and I thought really wanted to do that. I wanted to explore the past and share it with people who enjoyed learning about it. So
How
yeah,
lovely.
it
Yes.
started weirdly with Lunéville.
And now you've got a book with lots of to do with it. It's
you
wonderful.
know, Full circle.
Yes. Oh, that's lovely. Um, do you have any advice for anyone in our audience who would like to be a historian?
Oh, that's quite difficult. I'm not sure I'm yet in a good position to give advice about that, but
Sure
I'd
you
say
are.
please don't trust AI summaries on the internet. Read a lot before even starting any research in
Yes.
the archives. Find a topic you're passionate about, and I'd say know that you never know everything. You keep learning. I think being a historian is uncovering things, but also knowing that you will have to learn more as you work. So
Yeah,
yeah, be ready to learn. Don't
that
trust
is
any
so good.
courses.
Yeah. Well, that's really good advice there, and I agree with that. And I think that's important to stay humble, like as you've been saying. It's
Exactly,
because
yes.
there is so much we don't know, and it's important to keep reminding yourself of that. Very good advice. Thank you. Um, and do you have a favorite archive that you'd like to share with us?
Mm. So I think some people like the content of the archives. I think I'm a sucker for a nice reading room.
Hmm.
So I realize my answer might be a bit biased, but there was a part of the National Archives in Paris that
Hmm.
you could only consult in the Bibliothèque Richelieu. So not the Mitterrand one. This place is horrid, but the
Oh,
Bibliothèque Richelieu in the center of Paris.
yeah,
That was a beautiful place. So it was more the the place in which to read the archive rather than the archive
I
itself
see.
that really does it for me.
Right. Lovely. Um, okay, it's everyone's favorite part of the show, I think. Time to talk about a Stuart fantasy dinner party. Who would you invite? What would you serve? And who would you sit next to?
I think I would sit right between Anne and James. To hear all about the family feud, get a bit of gossip. I think that would be my seat. Um,
Yeah.
Few people I invite. Oh, a guy I've not really talked about, another Lauren Prince called Beauvau-Craon, and I would
Hmm.
obviously invite Leopold because Beauvau-Craon was Leopold's wife lover. So I want to know what's going
Oh,
on there.
oh dear. Whoa.
I'd also probably invite Vaudemont because he was
Mhm.
he was a Lauren Prince and
Yeah.
he knew everyone at Louis XIV court. So I expect him to be a really interesting character. So I'd be curious to see what he was like. Um, what's the other question? What would I serve in terms of food?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. For royalty, I think I'd get a cook. I wouldn't cook myself for them for sure.
Oh.
Um, knowing the people in the room, probably a lot of wine.
That'll
Um,
always go down well in most cases.
yeah, by all accounts, they were all quite likely drinkers.
I see. Oh, well, that's great. Yeah. Anything else to add before we go?
No, I don't think so. I think you'd already talked about, periodization, how it's weird that we stop the Stuart period in 1714, but
Yeah.
you still have a Jacobite claimant until 766. And I don't know if you
Yes.
know that, but it's also Cardinal Henry Benedict. who
Mm-hmm.
is also a Jacobite claimant, and he died in 1807. So, maybe like you
Yes.
said, look a bit outside of England and outside of the usual
Mm-hmm.
time period to learn more
Yes.
about the Stuarts, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. There's so much to learn, and it's all so interesting, and it's a pleasure to get to talk to people like you who are allowing us a greater insight into the past.
I
So
hope
thank
that
you very
was all
much.
interesting.
Oh, yes, certainly. Thank you so much. Uh, and I'll look forward to your next work. Definitely.
I'll let you know.
Yes, please do. Thank you so much for coming today. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you too, Andrea. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, lovely. So Dr. Filet's book, The Jacobites and the Grand Tour, gives us a unique perspective on the Jacobite diaspora and was published by Manchester University Press in 2025. You can find links to purchase it in the description below this YouTube video. Many thanks to our director and producer, Gavin of Orland Media, and thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to wish a happy Father's Day to everyone tomorrow. I hope you'll join me again next month when I welcome historian and novelist Catherine Curzon, who will chat with me about the tragic life of George I's mother, the subject of her 2020 biography, The Imprisoned Princess, The Scandalous Life of Sophia Dorothea of Celle. Until next time, don't forget to keep it Stuart.